Good morning and welcome to Glendale City Church. Please join with me in the programs in your bulletins with the invocation this morning. God of the ages, by whose almighty hand the founders of this country won freedom for themselves and for us, and lit the torch of freedom for nations then unborn. God of our fathers and our mothers, by whose almighty hand the founders of this country defined a nation where we are free to believe. Help us and all Americans maintain our liberties in righteousness and peace through Jesus Christ our Savior. Amen.
God of our fathers, whose almighty hand leads forth in beauty of the starry band of shining worlds in splendor through the skies. Deadly pestilence, may your strong arm be now our sure defense, your true religion in our hearts increase, your bounteous goodness nourish us in peace. Refresh thy people on their toilsome way. Lead us from night to neverending day. Fill all our lives with love and grace divine. All honor now before your throne we rise.
Well, folks, if you're not awake yet, that's your problem. Happy 4th of July, each one of you watching on the internet right now. It may not feel like your normal 4th of July celebration today because of the circumstances in which we are, but happy 4th of July nevertheless, even though we don't have fireworks this year. What a shame. We have a couple of announcements here today. After we have now just welcomed you each, a couple of announcements. First of all, today's program will be a scripted program, And you will find it on the bulletin that is on glendalecitychurch.org/bulletins. You will find the whole bulletin there. Reminder also that after the service today, there will be an after party with Tom and George, roughly 12:15. That depends upon how long the speaker talks today, but we anticipate by 12:15 it'll be able to view the after party. Also, there's an announcement about next Saturday, next Sabbath. There will be communion, and it is as we did last time: bring your own juice and bread. There will be nothing for you unless you provide your own at your homes for the online service. There's also a mistake in the bulletin, which happens every now and again, despite our best efforts. The Glendale Noon Concert is July 15, as the bulletin says. However, it is not this coming Wednesday, it is the following Wednesday. You may notice from the bulletin today that we are having, for the first time ever, drum roll please, the virtual choir. The anthems this morning will be sung by our Glendale City Church virtual choir, at least several of the members, not all of them, but several of them. And it sounds really beautiful as far as I'm concerned. And keep our fingers crossed that as we present today online the virtual choir, both the two anthems and the offertory duet, we keep our fingers crossed that they will it'll be viewable easily online, which we believe it will. Finally, before we take a few moments to greet each other, a couple of prayer concerns for today to mention. I will announce them now. Tom McCurry, the pastor of the Sunday Lifeway Church that meets in our congregation here typically, is recovering at home after a procedure in hospital. Secondly, Christina Bustos' father, Jose Bustos, is seriously ill in New York, and they would appreciate our prayers during the week for them. And thirdly, something that hits home for each one of us, Kay Silvestri is now home, recovering from knee surgery, but when she got home, she discovered that her family are all COVID positive, including her grandson, Justin, who has been on a ventilator all this week in the hospital in the ICU. We need special prayers during the week for the Silvestri family. I just texted Kay this morning, and apparently Justin is now off the ventilator, which we can be thankful for. Nevertheless, it is something to remember in prayer. And finally, Evie's cousin Sebastian also has COVID-19, and the family would appreciate prayers for him as well. Please take a few minutes, greet each other where you are, or write online and greet all of us on the online program, and then we will continue with the program shortly. Thank you. Let us seek God in prayer. God of our fathers and our mothers, we come before you this morning in worship, as many of our forebears stood before you in days gone by. We celebrate our history and all that our country has achieved. On this day, we rejoice in the blessings that you have graciously given us. We thank you for the gift of liberty for this generation and for the generations to come. We thank you for the independence and peace that we are privileged to enjoy. And we thank you for all those who have bravely given their lives in the defense of freedom and justice. Yet we also acknowledge that as a nation and as a people, we have not always chosen the right way. And for that, we ask your forgiveness. We have not always treated our human brothers and sisters as siblings in your divine family. Too often, we have allowed differences of nationality, race, orientation, or economic status to divide us. On this day, we commit ourselves to wholeheartedly honoring and serving you. With everything that we are, we lay our lives before you. Make us a generous people, a forgiving people, a people set aside to love and honor you forever. May we look again only to you this Independence Day. May your Spirit breathe new life into this nation. In the words of Scripture, may justice flow like rivers and righteousness like a never-failing stream. Be with us this morning, this day, and this coming year with your continued grace and power. We ask in the name of the Almighty One. Amen.
Today, we continue what has become a long-standing tradition, a celebration of American freedom. Freedom to believe. We hear readings from the scripture and from history. We sing and hear music that celebrates our freedom as believers. Some may wonder why we do this in worship today. It is because we are citizens who believe that all are welcome and loved by God, because He created us free to obey, free to believe. As patriarchs and prophets puts it, God made our first parents free moral agents, capable of appreciating the wisdom and benevolence of His character and the justice of His requirements, and with full liberty to yield or to withhold obedience. God might have created us without the power to transgress, but in that case, man would have been not a free moral agent, but a mere automaton. Without freedom of choice, his obedience would not have been voluntary, but forced. Today, we celebrate again that freedom, freedom to believe.
A reading from Micah 6. With what shall I come before the Lord and bow down before the exalted God? Shall I come before him with burnt offerings, with calves a year old? Will the Lord be pleased with thousands of rams, with 10,000 rivers of olive oil? Shall I offer my firstborn for my transgression, the fruit of my body for the sin of my soul? He has shown you, O mortal, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you? To act justly, and to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God.
The first two lasting English settlements in what is now the United States were in the 1600s at Jamestown, Virginia, and Plymouth, Massachusetts. Jamestown was established as a business venture by London investors. The Plymouth colony, however, was settled by people we call Puritans, who were dissatisfied with the pace of Protestant reform in Europe. Many came to America to avoid being persecuted for their beliefs. Puritan ministers and leaders, however, sought levels of political and religious conformity that proved unattainable. Many of the Europeans who first settled on the continent were looking for religious freedom for themselves, but not for others. In many ways, they established colonies that conformed to their respective versions of Christianity. Some made it illegal to engage in business on Sundays. Others used wooden stocks to humiliate and torture those that they deemed wayward. Some executed women they called witches. Religious dissenters were put on trial and banished, or at least encouraged to depart. It was a desire for liberty of conscience that inspired the pilgrims to brave the perils of the long journeys across the sea, to endure the hardships and dangers of the wilderness, and with God's blessing to lay on the shores of America the foundation of a mighty nation. Yet, honest and God-fearing as they were, the pilgrims did not comprehend the great principle of religious liberty. The freedom which they sacrificed so much to secure for themselves, they were not equally ready to grant to others. Some who pioneered this nation believed that the new government should be religiously neutral. Others, who wanted the nation to have no state religion, were skeptics. Still others wanted the federal government to leave this matter in the hands of the various states. A number were Christian believers who realized that the only way to guarantee religious freedom for themselves was to grant it to others too. There were many who agreed with the principle stated by Roger Williams, namely, that forced worship stinks in the nostril of God.
Our fathers living still, in spite of dungeon, fire, and sword. Oh, how our hearts beat high with joy whene'er we hear that glorious word. Faith of our fathers, holy faith, we will be true to thee till death. Faith of our mothers, Christian faith, is truth beyond
Up, up, I beseech you, shut your gates, said a leading would-be politician from New York. An enemy nation was sending their criminals to the United States because this country hadn't as yet erected protective gates, as he called it. Their crime? They were practicing a religion that would destroy our democracy with its ignorance and despotism. The man with a warning? None other than Samuel Morse, later renowned as the inventor of the telegraph and Morse code. And the religion being attacked in 1835? Not Islam, but Catholicism. In the 1830s and 40s, Protestants burned Catholic convents and churches, killing several Catholics for good measure. Anti-Catholic fears would continue until well into the 20th century. As historians have pointed out, despite what we're taught in school, America did not have robust religious freedom for most of its history.
In the 17th century, Puritans hanged Quakers from trees in Boston Common for the crime of practicing their faith. At the time of the American Revolution, half of the evangelical Baptist preachers in Virginia had been imprisoned for their preaching. When the Declaration of Independence was signed, 9 of the 13 colonies barred Catholics and Jews from holding office. In 1838, the governor of Missouri issued Executive Order 44, calling for the extermination of Mormons, leading to many of their deaths. Hundreds of thousands of Africans were stripped not only of liberty, but also of their religions in what had been termed a spiritual Holocaust. After the Civil War, the U.S. government banned many Native American spiritual practices, coercing their children to convert to Christianity. Before and during World War II, Jehovah's Witnesses were imprisoned, beaten, or castrated for refusing, as a matter of conscience, to salute the American flag. It was World War II that led President Franklin Roosevelt, at the time facing the opposing threats of fascism and communism, to declare that religious freedom was a defining characteristic of American patriotism. True democracy, he said, requires 4 essential liberties: freedom of speech and expression, freedom from want, freedom from fear, and the freedom of every person to worship God in his own way everywhere in the world.
From plagues and tribulations.
Religion without governmental sanction or support. How would this actually work? How would it work in a rapidly expanding nation? It soon became necessary for the US Supreme Court to distinguish between the kinds of church controversies that civil courts should deal with and those they should not. The Supreme Court declared, whenever the questions of discipline or of faith or ecclesiastical rule, custom or laws have been decided by the highest authorities of the church, all federal courts must accept such decisions as final. Other nations may act differently, Justice Samuel Miller admitted, but in the United States, citizens have the full and free right to entertain any religious belief, to practice any religious principle, and to teach any religious doctrine which does not infringe on personal rights. To emphasize this point, the court pointed out that the law knows no heresy and is committed to the support of no dogma, the establishment of no sect. In the 19th century, federal attention to First Amendment religion cases was quite limited. In the 1840s and 1850s, the most passionate controversy of all concerned slavery. This bitter issue divided families, churches, and entire denominations, and ultimately the country itself. The major implication of the Civil War and its aftermath for church-state matters is found in the 14th Amendment to the Constitution, adopted in 1868. That amendment reads as follows, quote, "No state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the law," wording that was clearly intended to hinder racial discrimination within state governments. Today, there is renewed urgency to address the systemic racism found in our country, a failure that has never been adequately addressed. As the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. famously said, "No one is free until we are all free." It is an ongoing struggle for freedom and equality to which all Christians should aspire.
In Egypt under Pharaoh, the Israelites were bound from plagues and tribulations. No respite could be found. Praise God who in surprising ways gave passage through the ways. Our Liberator rescues, our Liberator saves. From Africa to gangplanks across a friendless sea, black captives harshly treated, all struggle to be free. Praise God who strengthened advocates with power that does and dares. Our Liberator rescues, our Liberator cares. Whenever hurting humans unjustly live in pain, the hungry, homeless, hopeless cry out for
Below the federal level, however, a whole universe of Sunday law cases opened up to be heard by municipal and state courts and decided in a wide variety of ways. Actually, Sunday laws were universal in the colonies, waned after the American Revolution, then expanded in the early 19th century. America's last great surge of Sunday laws, which took place in the 1880s, was particularly hard on Seventh-day Adventists, many of whom were imprisoned for weeks or months and sometimes assigned to chain gangs. The SDA Encyclopedia reports that many Adventists at the time served lengthy prison terms for disrupting the Sunday sacredness. Fears were high. Recent research suggests that several teachers and students at Southern Adventist University, including the principal, were imprisoned, but did not actually serve on chain gangs, though other local Adventists did. Adventists, expecting Christ to return to earth well before the end of the 19th century, did not see these events as a foretaste of a final conflict generations later, but as the early stages of the final conflict itself. A national Sunday law seemed imminent, and the arrests and prison sentences seemed to be leading to a not very distant death penalty. This prompted the denomination's first religious liberty journals and organizations. Before the actual threat to Sabbath observance, as opposed to the theoretical danger that had been anticipated since the identification of the two-horned beast in the 1850s, Adventists had not been actively concerned with religious liberty. Once that threat had manifested itself, religious liberty became a major Adventist preoccupation.
And God of glory, on your people pour your power. Now fulfill your church's story, bring her bud to glorious flower. Grant us wisdom, grant us courage for the facing of this hour. Of evil around us, scorn your Christ, or sail his ways. From the fears that long have bound us, from our hearts to faith and praise, grant us wisdom, grant us courage for the facing of this hour. For the facing of this hour. Cure your children's worrying madness, bend our pride to your control. Shame your wanton selfish gladness, rich in goods and poor in soul. Grant us wisdom, grant us courage, lest we miss your kingdom's goal. Lest we miss your kingdom's goal. on lofty places, gird our lives that we may be armored with all Christ-like graces, in the fright to see all free. Grant us wisdom, grant us courage, that we fail not man nor thee. Grant we fail not man nor thee.
From its beginning, the Adventist Church has been in the forefront in emphasizing the importance of religious liberty and the separation of church and state. The first article on the subject, written by J.N. Andrews, appeared as early as 1851. In the 19th century, if secular laws ended up inadvertently violating a person's religious belief, the individual typically received no accommodation for their pain or inconvenience. That changed in the 1963 landmark case involving Adele Sherbert, a Seventh-day Adventist textile worker in South Carolina. Her factory instituted a 6-day work week, putting Adele in a no-win situation since her conscience would not allow her to work on Saturday, the biblical Sabbath. Other factories in the area also required Saturday work, so she was forced to quit without any alternative job offer available. However, when she applied for unemployment benefits, she was rejected on the grounds that she had voluntarily quit her job. On June 17, 1963, the Supreme Court ruled 7-2 in favor of Adele, saying that the state can infringe on someone's religious practice only if there is a compelling state interest, and only if no further recourse is available for the individual. This profoundly changed the nature of religious liberty. No longer would it defined merely as absence of active persecution, but would now also include a recognition of allowing individuals freedom of faith, even when that conflicted with laws that most other people have to obey.
How sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see. 'Twas grace that taught my heart to fear, and grace my fears relieved. How precious did that grace appear
always good to have Jessie singing beside us. Thank you, Jessie, for your beautiful voice. While great steps have been made in religious freedom in recent times, it has not all been encouraging. The worst attack on Jews in this country took place in 2018 at the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh, where 11 people died. Religious hate crimes against Jews, Muslims, and others have surged dramatically in recent years. And also, persecution against Mormons and Catholics in previous century was justified by claims that they were not legitimate religions. So it was troubling to read televangelist Pat Robertson's claim a few years ago that, quote, "We have to recognize that Islam is not a religion. It is a worldwide political movement bent on domination of the world." Such language intends to strike fear and does nothing to foster James Madison's original vision of religious freedom for all. Are we off? Here we go. Attempts by recent alt-right groups seeking to make our country, like Israel of old, into a Christian dominion or theocracy are not only unconstitutional, but also ominously reminiscent of the religiously rigid Puritan settlements of the 1600s. While we may not find all our neighbors equally endearing, we should try to understand them. In each generation, generalizations have been made against religious and social minorities that we don't like or understand. Baptists were labeled as ignorant. Catholics were a danger to the United States. Jews were greedy. Jehovah's Witnesses were unpatriotic. Christians were bigots. Muslims were terrorists. As we learn to accept and coexist with those we may not always see eye to eye with, we will find ourselves well on the way to the goal that our founders envisioned in our country. And with that challenge in mind and those goals in mind, we will press on in this coming year. We are reminded of the goals of this country and the aims of this country from its start, and we continue to hold those goals and aims close to our hearts and close to our endeavors. At this time, we will pause and take the usual weekly offering to help the causes in which we believe. This offering goes to, of course, amongst other things, support Glendale City Church and its mission, both within the Glendale City and globally. And if you are able to give to this cause, to help the church and to help the furtherance of God's work throughout the world, feel free to give at this time. You may feel free to give either by donating online at glendalecitychurch.org, or you can call the office at 818-244-7241, or you can drop it off in a letter and mail it to 610 East California Avenue, Glendale, California 91206. Feel free to give as you are able, and if you're not able to free, may God bless you as you continue your life with Him. At this time, we will have a virtual duet as the offertory.
And have a gift Though I may give all I possess, and striving so my love profess, but not be given by love within, and profit soon turn strangely thin.